Welcome to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brian Griffith, and here's what's going down this week in your backyard and across the world. 5 students at Prairie View A&M University are suing Waller County, charging that the county is violating the Voting Rights Act and the U.S. Constitution by not providing early voting locations on campus or in the city of Prairie View during the first week of early voting. This is the latest in a long history of controversies around voter suppression that have plagued the county over several decades. What is at stake in the fight over voting rights in Prairie View, and what can we learn about nationwide voter suppression from this case? Joining us to talk about this is Jacob Aronowitz, the Eastern Regional Field Director of the Mike Siegel campaign, who was recently arrested in Waller County for attempting to deliver a letter to the county asking that to demand resolution to the county's plan to require students to fill out an additional form during the voter registration process. Thank you, Jacob, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your work.
Yeah, very, very glad to have you on. So let's get into what exactly is going on in Waller County. Let's start with a little bit of history of Waller County that was, I think, illustrated pretty well when you were on the on Rachel Maddow's show recently, but has also kind of come up during the course of this election. Waller County has a very long history of voter suppression.
In reference to the era that you're talking about, and you're right that we should probably just more or less assume, or we could research if we wanted to, all the civil rights abuses that preceded it. But in 1979, students at Prairie View won a Supreme Court case, essentially, Syme v. U.S. Syme at the time was the elections administrator, and he was requiring the students to fill out this onerous questionnaire to prove their quote-unquote bona fide residence in the county. So what he was basically doing was trying to deny that college students residing in Waller County during their tenure at the university, Prairie View A&M University, were actually residents of Waller County and therefore shouldn't be able to vote in that county. And that case went to the Supreme Court in 79, and they affirmed the lower court's decision that he was out of line and that he should be, enjoined from doing that. So that actually was a precedent that established that college students across the country could vote in the county that they reside in while they're at school. And, that's a right that I exercised when I was in school. A lot of us have. But that didn't actually, obviously didn't bring an end to the voter suppression in Waller County. It kind of, one of the next ugly spats of voter suppression. And through the 80s, there were some efforts made at bureaucratic suppression, but it really rose to a head, if you will, in the 90s. In 1992, the district attorney of Waller County, actually threatened to and then did, in fact, indict students, I believe 19 students, on voter fraud charges for voting in the county because, per his own words, and I'm paraphrasing, they did not meet his legal standard of a resident in Waller County. And that was in the 90s. He's indicting students for voting in the county of their residence after a Supreme Court case almost 20 years prior to that. And it doesn't end there. In the 2000s, in 2000, I think it was 2003. Yes, I believe 2003, the district attorney, again, is threatening to not let students vote and to bar them from voting. And that was just in the 2000s. And then there were marches and an intense protest movement that coalesced in finally getting an early voting location on the campus. But even that came under fire repeatedly, and there are episodes here that I'm not even able to touch on because I'm not expert in. And then now we come to 2018, about 5 years prior to the last sort of big problem. In 2016, there were problems too. There were large protests in 2016 when there were irregularities or there were attempted irregularities, and there were protests then. It's almost there's in the recollections of the people who live in the county, there's no election cycle that's been unmarred by some attempted official suppression, basically. And it's repeatedly, made news or or taken to the national stage in say, a Supreme Court case or otherwise. And then so in 2018, there were student addresses that the prior administration of the county's government, had told the students to use. Had told the students to use two addresses that were placeholder addresses to represent that they lived on the campus. And then after that administration's tenure ended, the new elections administrator claims that they realized in the primaries of 2018 that in fact one such of those addresses was in the wrong precinct, and that therefore any students who had, under the instruction of the previous county government, put one of those addresses in their registration, they would have to fill out a new form that they politely termed a statement of residence form. They'd have to fill out a new form before they'd be allowed to vote on election day at their poll on campus, because the other one was in the wrong precinct. So they had said they had found out. Then there's multiple problems with this, but it's a repeated pattern of official voter suppression. And one big problem with the idea that someone has to fill out another form before they vote is that that's putting a hindrance on voting rights. And the way that the courts have interpreted the franchise is that that right should not be infringed. And there should be strict scrutiny on any barrier to voting, and other legal standards as well. And so that in and of itself is something that probably wouldn't have been allowed to happen under the prior incarnation of the Voting Rights Act before it was gutted in another recent Supreme Court case. It's something Texas wouldn't have even been allowed to do without consulting the Justice Department, because it just makes it slightly harder to vote and makes another hoop for people to jump through, another form for them to fill out. Another thing is, in implementing the policy, then you've got to, on the fly and within a matter of weeks, instruct and train all of the county officials or even the elections workers, who are basically these part-time workers, as everyone knows, that are brought on for the election. You'd have to train them in how to administer this policy. And if they weren't properly trained, or if they had an axe to grind themselves, they could purposely misinterpret the policy or misapply it and intimidate students out of voting or turn them away by mistake, just because a new barrier had been put in place. And the third problem, the third and perhaps largest problem with this, is that the form they wanted the students to use is probably not legal for that purpose under state law. So that's what in the same election cycle in 2018, they only scheduled 3 days. Only 3 days of early voting in the entire 2 weeks, not a single day during the first week. 3 days for a population of approximately 9,500 students in a county that only has 31,000 people, give or take.
Yeah, I'm looking at the...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm looking at the makeup of Waller County, and it's something over, I believe, 57% white, 29% black or African American. I imagine that a very large percentage, given this small of a county, given that that's 9,000, and the entire population of the county is, I believe, 40-some thousand. 43,000 as of the census. So,
oh, wow.
Largely, we're talking about most of the black population of this county, a very large percentage of the black population of this county being centered right here at Prairie View A&M. When you look at the history there, the kind of history you just told us of this uninterrupted, essentially, voter suppression, going back to the Voting Rights Act, it tells a different story than when people believe voter suppression began to happen, and that it was sort of a thing that was believed to happen under Jim Crow, and then it went away, and then supposedly we had this kind of democratic system until the kind of Tea Party movement. But in fact, this shows that in many ways this voter suppression continued uninterrupted in so many areas, in so just absolutely publicly belligerent ways all throughout this period. It seems like up to the point where you kind of sent this protest letter to the county courthouse.
Right. So, and the address issue and the so-called solution to that wasn't a real solution to the address issue is what that letter was about. And I echo your sentiment completely that voter suppression was a continuous part of strategies, because there's a de jure and a de facto kind of component. There's what you can do with official power, and in terms of making laws and burdensome regulations and things like that, and to try to make sure people don't vote. But then, of course, there's going to be, these strong cultural components like outright white supremacist formations like the Ku Klux Klan, just sort of, general nastiness from your white neighbors. I mean, if you're a black person trying to exercise their franchise rights. So there was always there weren't. It's not like it's like you said, there aren't like periods where it's a tactic employed and then it dies and it's revived. It's like a constant kind of thing. I was just talking to a friend of mine in Waller today, actually, and she told me a story that she had heard from her parents, where the person who ran the grocery store was a white person, and they had all the black people were on credit to the grocery store to get their groceries. That's how everyone got groceries at that time. And so when election time came around, as she recounted it, the store owner would tell people as they checked out their groceries, like, remember who gives you credit, in order to try to convince them not to vote or to think twice about voting. That he would just cut off their food supply and use the fact that he was both their creditor and their break of bulk point for food to try to intimidate them out of political activity or political consciousness or at least voting. You're essentially correct, that's for sure. And I walked in there to deliver a letter saying, we demand that you not require this form and that you accept the addresses that you told students to put on forms, when they registered to vote. When I went in there, I knocked on the door of the county judge's office. He's a man named Carbet Duhan III. He goes by Trey Duhan in the county. Anyway, I knocked on Duhan's door. Okay, knocked on the door. A voice from inside says, come in, something along those lines. I open the door, I go in, and there's one clerk sitting behind a desk. I can see two other women in rooms, in other little corridors or rooms of the office. And, I turned to her and I'm like, I'm Jacob Aronowitz. I'm with the Siegel for Congress campaign. I'm here to deliver a letter to Trey Duhan and Christy Eason. And remember, Eason is the elections administrator, the new one that had been brought in by this new slate of county commissioners. But she says, okay, well, I'll take it. And so I hand it to her, the letter addressed to Eason and Duhan that's protesting this address and residence change system that they've implemented. And she just drops it on her desk. She doesn't put it in any kind of ingoing mail folder or anything like that. And, didn't give me a receipt, or there wasn't a logbook or anything. And I already had my phone out, and I just snapped a picture of her with it in her hand. And then I went to walk out. But, I didn't really get far. She immediately was very agitated by my having taken the picture. She threw her hand up over her face as soon as she heard the sound that my phone's camera made when it clicked. And she started, basically saying at the top of her voice, did you just take a picture of me? Did you just take a picture of me? I didn't give you permission to take that picture. That's an invasion of privacy. I don't know who you are. And then she started insisting that I delete the picture. Now, of course, all of this because she's the employee of the county judge in the county courthouse in her office performing public duty in a one-party recording state. All of these demands and questions are things I don't have to answer. And, I don't know that they're illegitimate, but they don't have any legal force. So I basically remain silent. They should be trained on the law or, to know what to expect if you're a public servant. And I just found the whole thing audacious for her to try to intimidate me out of just exercising normal political and civil rights in a fraught and tense situation,
And of course, the intention here, for those who just might be tuning in, you were trying to, because you were worried about the fact that you were, even though in a courthouse, even though you were in an official legal capacity here, you were obviously worried that that she was not going to deliver the letter that you had asked to deliver, specifically regarding voter suppression in this county.
Yeah, no, exactly. I don't know this person that I'm referring to, this clerk who was in this office who said that they would take this letter on behalf of Duhan and Eason. I don't know this person personally in terms of oh, I don't trust them, they're a mistrustful person who's a liar. I mean, it's just the nature of the institution. The nature of the institution has been to attempt to suppress the civil rights and access to the franchise of this population at Prairie View A&M and the city of Prairie View. And, this type of like what we call strategic incompetence, like losing documents on purpose, not processing things on purpose, presenting courses of action that are not actually legitimate or legal, that type of strategic incompetence where things get lost when it's convenient and so on had been a symptom. In fact, there was another anecdote that came out of Waller County, also from Miss Maddox, from Denise Maddox, the candidate for county judge. She told me when the new elections administrator came in the second time, the person before Eason, I believe his last name is Teed, Dan Teed. I could have that wrong, but I know the last name is Teed. The last elections administrator, when he came into office, previous to Eason, he said that he found several thousand unprocessed registrations from Prairie View that were stuffed in closets and drawers, just lost registrations, as the saying goes. Maddox told me that Teed, previous elections administrator to Eason, told her that he counted 5,000 or so unprocessed registrations. And this is like double hearsay. This is from Teed to Maddox to me to you. So I can't offer much independent corroboration. This is just, frankly, an anecdote that I haven't independently corroborated. But it goes to show, I think, like the culture around Prairie View voting. And the culture is don't let the kids vote. Don't let the students vote, I should say. Don't let the students vote. Find a way to make sure the students don't vote. That's been the pattern. So it's not implausible to me that, 5,000 registrations were found in the office. I mean, in the state of Texas, we found out last year that the high schools weren't turning in the voter registrations on time or properly administering them in the first place in some instances. So it seems like there's a lot of strategic incompetence to go around when it comes to voter suppression. And to answer your question fully and finally, I'm sorry, but to answer your question, yeah, I was not sure that letter, once in her hand, would actually make its way to Eason and Duhon. And I wanted some collateral, some proof, a receipt. Frankly, I've dealt with public entities before. Lots of them have logbooks or receipts or things like that when you interact with them. When they give you a ticket, you certainly get a lot of paperwork. So I found like the lack of process to be like, a sort of specific indictment in that situation. They could have allayed my general fears about Waller County government and its history of voter suppression and strategic incompetence if they had an actual, kind of standard procedure for when they receive a document from the public. And at some point, I just turned around to go. She tried to get in front of me, but this was only after she had signaled the other two people who she'd been working with to leave Duhan's office and go and get the bailiff. And when they brushed past me, that's when I kind of turned to leave. She tried to brush past me too, and I'm walking down the hallway back toward where I entered the building, and the bailiff is coming right at me, and he's like, it was very intense. Immediately he was like walking toward me briskly and telling me to stop, and I just turned to the left to try to leave. There was a door. I didn't know at the time, but it was actually locked. It was such a scary feeling when I pressed on the door and it didn't open. But at the time, as I went to try to turn to the left, before I got to the door, he pushed me. He pushed me back toward a bench pretty hard, and that's when the adrenaline really set in. And he just was like, "You're not free to go. You can't leave." And I'm like, "Am I being detained? Am I under arrest?" And he's like, "You can't leave. I need to ask you some questions. Who are you?" And I'm like, "Am I being detained? Am I free to leave?" He just he wouldn't say I was being detained. He wouldn't say why I was being detained. He's like, "I need to figure out who you are." It didn't seem like he even knew. He's like, "I need to figure out what's going on." And he had put his hands on me before any of that even happened. And that's when I started to walk away from him. And he's like, "No, you can't go. You can't go." And he tried to kind of come at me again, but I just kind of walk back toward the wall to get away from him and go back to the doors and walk away. And another bailiff came up and I pressed on the door, and that's when I found out it was locked. And she wouldn't even tell me her name and badge number at first. I was like, "Who are you? What's your name and badge number?" And she was like, "I'm a bailiff." And then finally, I think she was like, "I'm Bailiff Johnson or Bailiff Watts." I can't even remember her name, but she refused to give me her badge number. the whole thing was just like really unnerving because like from the get-go, when the first bailiff, the male bailiff who came over from where I had entered, where the metal detectors were, when he put his hands on me without like a second thought or without like asking me anything, like it was like the first thing he did. I didn't even make it past the bench before he shoved me. They just didn't seem to have like, I don't know, even a regard for the laws that are on the books or what proper procedure actually is. And so that like, I just felt like I was in a completely kind of different type of interaction than even interactions I've had with law enforcement previously, which, you know, aren't always the most pleasant for people. That usually ends in a ticket or something worse when you do interact with them. But I'd never felt like that unnerved before, frankly.
Yeah,
and I never had any officer of the law like put their hands on me that quickly either. And maybe that speaks to my own privilege too. But it was honestly pretty frightening. At this point, I'm kind of there's this door right that was locked, and I'm being confronted by a bailiff Watts, I believe, and she finally tells me her badge number after I asked her like 4 or 5 times. I took my phone out and I started taking pictures of the two of them, and they did the same thing that the clerk did, tried to throw their hands up like I didn't, like they were like, you know, immune to that and they shouldn't, and that I couldn't do that or something. And pretty quickly, like more bailiffs start getting there. Like the first bailiff, he's like called the other bailiffs and they've called the police, and they're like, the police are coming out. I'm like, am I free to leave? Am I being detained? Like, what, you know, what's going on? And they're like, no, you have to stay here. And like, I would try to like not like struggle with them or even like touch them. I would try to like walk to a door, and they would like put their bodies in front of me or just use their arm to stop me. I'd be like, am I being detained? They're like, you're being held for further information or something. Like they would always like say like, you can't leave, but they wouldn't actually like answer the question of, am I being detained or arrested? And pretty quickly I called Mike, actually. I called the candidate. And I like was like, I'm on, and he's actually an attorney too, and that's why I called him. And then it just kind of like they just brought more law enforcement in. At one point I was hemmed in by about 7 or 8 officers in the stairwell. The stairwell, it leads from like the second floor down to a landing where there's a door that actually leads out to some stairs, and then there's another set of stairs inside the building, right, that go down to the first floor where the metal detector is and the entrance to the parking lot is. And the exit of the building that's on the landing, like I said, it leads to some stairs that would take you down to the quote-unquote first floor, and it's just like a promenade, you know, like a lot of courthouses have. You know what I mean? So that was the door that was locked that I was trying to exit in, and I'm just hemmed in this stairwell, the roundabout stairwell with like 8 officers on all sides, and they're just like asking me for my ID and asking me questions, and I'm just like refusing to answer and just asking, am I being detained? Am I arrested? Am I free to leave? I'd like to leave. May I leave? Am I, you know, and this just kind of continued for a while with Mike on the phone. And at one point they were like, who's that on the phone? Like, that's your attorney, right? And I'm like, yeah, it's my attorney, Mike. And they're like, wait, I thought you said your candidate's name was Mike. And I'm like, well, it is. It's the same guy. And they're like, oh, are you lying? Are you like, is that your attorney or is that a candidate? I'm like, well, he's both. And they're like, oh, he's a candidate. Okay, well, what's he running for? And I was like, well, he's running for Congress in District 10. They're like, what party? And then like 2 more of them are like, what party? Yeah, what party? And I was like, Democrat. And then right about that time, and about, I think I'd been detained for like maybe 10 to 30 minutes, somewhere in there. And then the sheriff comes in, and he sees me like within moments, like maybe he'd been briefed, maybe he hadn't, but within moments he's like, get the phone out of his hand, put him in handcuffs. We're arresting him on a 48-hour investigative hold. And then they took my phone out of my hand while my lawyer was on the line and put me in handcuffs and put me in the back of a squad car. So they put me in the cop car in handcuffs. Like they took my keys. They took my phone, just like confiscated it right out of my hand when they had arrested me. And then they drove me to the county jail. And like people will remember the county jail. People remember the Waller County Jail because that's where Sandra Bland died in 2015 in police custody. And you're going in the same jail. And the creepiest thing to me, well, I mean, there are lots of creepy parts of this, but like I recognized the garage from her police videos. Like the garage door opened, the cop car rolled into the garage, and and the door started to close. And I like looked around and I was like, I remember this part from when like, you know, she was driven in here, and it's from the perspective of the garage, like watching the police car drive in, and you can like see her in the back seat. I feel like it was really unnerving. And, like, no, there's no charges or anything. I'm on, like, I've been put in a cop car and taken to a jail on an investigative hold. I don't even know what that is, frankly. And this guy, the sheriff, has just said it's going to be for 48 hours. He looked me in the eyes when he said it, and I think he called me a son of a bitch under his breath. But I'm like 99% sure he's like, that'll fix you, you son of a bitch, and looked me right in the eye right after he said the 48-hour thing, which was also, like, really unnerving. Because, like, when someone says they're going to fix you in Waller County, like, I don't know, quite what that means. And on that note, like, not all of Waller County is like this all the time. I don't want to paint Waller County as, like, this, like, overwhelmingly awful place. Like, I spent a lot of time there during this campaign and gone to tons of community events. And, like, people are really nice there. People are really nice there, like, just people that you'll meet when you're canvassing or you go to events or whatever. But, like, when it comes to voting and civil rights and issues of power, like, then things can get out of hand really quickly. So I just wanted to put that out there because I do have so many people in Waller County that, like, I care a lot about and I would count as friends now, and, like, people that are great. And but that wasn't what was going on today. I was, like, in the jail, and they take me out of the car. There's not, like, rough stuff or anything, but you're there, like, with no charges, and they take you into to the little holding area. Basically, there's a counter and a couple more deputies. One of them looks like a ranking person, a little bit older. They seem to have authority. They're telling other people what to do. And they start the medical intake survey, which is, they ask you a bunch of questions about your mental and physical health, presumably before you're put into, like, cells with other people at the county jail, I guess. And they had, like, taken, my wallet and the phone and I guess, like, a lighter and a pack of cigarettes or whatever I'd had in my short pockets at the time. And I was trying to get through it, and I'd been to magistrate jail in San Antonio before, so I was just trying to get ready for going into General Popota County Jail, and answering the questions honestly, because I guess there would be, like, pretty heavy repercussions or something if I don't know. At that point I was just trying to answer the questions to make sure I didn't get put in some sort of, like, mental ward or something like that. I don't know. I was becoming a little paranoid at that point, probably.
Yeah, I can only imagine why.
While we were doing the medical intake survey, before I even got put into general population, everything just stopped. Everything stopped on a dime, came to a screeching halt. And they were like, stop. Don't take his picture. Don't fingerprint him. Don't do the papers on the arrest record. Give him his stuff back. And my stuff came through the property drawer. Like, the property office was, like, right behind where I was sitting, and my stuff came back to me in a little yellow pouch. And my fingerprints weren't taken, and neither was my mugshot. And I guess I don't know if there were any papers or not vis-a-vis arrest record or anything. Not really sure. But I was ushered into the police station, which is, like, an adjoining set of offices to the county jail, I guess. I think it's the sheriff's station. I don't know if that's different from the police station or if they share officing. I'm not really sure. And they ushered me into a conference room. They offered me water, and they were like, well, we're just going to do an interview. We're going to do, like, an interview, and they informed me of my rights, and I quickly invoked and didn't say anything through the course of the interview. The interview was really weird. They were like, we're going to issue you a citation for failure to identify, for not presenting ID, failure to identify, Class C misdemeanor, not an arrestable offense, and we're going to let you go. And I was like, okay. And they're like, and you have to sign here. And I was like, well, all right. And they were like, and we're going to keep your phone, and we're going to get a warrant to do a forensic download and look at its contents to see if there's any evidence of a crime that took place at Waller County Courthouse. And you have to sign here. And I was still, frankly, freaked out and paranoid. And they had also told me they were about to let me, like, leave this police station / jail. So I did sign that as well. I wasn't sure if I had to or not. I think they said I didn't have to, but I don't know what would have happened to my phone if I didn't. And I'm not a lawyer. And they said they were going to let me leave this police station / jail. So I signed that too. And then they left for a bit, and then one of them comes back, and he goes on this diatribe, this really interesting diatribe, frankly, where he's like, all right, let's be honest. Let's be honest with each other. I respect you. You respect me. Let's be honest. I'm not going to speak to the legality of your actions. I'm not going to speak to that. But can we both agree that it wasn't the most ethical thing to do, that you were trying to engage in political muckraking and make trouble, and that really our country has bigger problems that we need to come together on and try to solve? Don't you think that we have bigger and better things to do? And I was like, and I just said, I've invoked. I'm not going to say anything. I hear what you're saying. I acknowledge I've heard it. I'm not going to say anything. And then I think there were a couple more stanzas on the same theme about how, well, you can at least agree that we have problems that we can agree on and we should come together on. I'm not going to talk. I hear what you're saying. I'm not going to say anything. And it was the strangest. I mean, it was the strangest kind of thing I'd heard from law enforcement in a while. I don't know if he was trying to get me to admit to something or not, if he was trying to talk himself into thinking that he didn't do anything bad that day. I don't really know. I mean, it was strange. And then shortly thereafter, I was walked out of the jail. They even offered to drive me back to my car, which they informed me they hadn't impounded. Frankly, surprising to me. But a couple of people that I knew from Waller County, I hadn't even contacted them. Mike was the only one I had been on the phone with. I guess he got in contact with them. But two people I knew from Waller County, Sylvia Cedillo, local defense attorney, and Lisa Steger, who's actually running for House District 3. She's running for State House. They were outside the jail, and Denise had been there earlier too, and I think one or two other Waller people had been there too. And they just picked. I just went back with them. I did not want to get back in another cop car, and we rode back to my car. And we rode back to my car, and we of course talked the whole way, and they were really comforting. It was really great that allies I knew from the community were there when I got out. That was really amazing. And and then I went back to my car, and I told Sylvia and Lisa about the phone situation. I ended up getting the phone back the next day, and they informed me that they hadn't pursued a warrant with the DA, and that they hadn't done the forensic download on the phone. And I got it back. That's pretty much where the arrest story ends. It was really weird. I mean, that was the overwhelming. I mean, the thing, the harrowing part of it, or the trauma of it, or whatever, wasn't nearly what it could have been, what it has been for other people in that county. To be frank about it, what other people have experienced in this country, honestly, the overwhelming kind of emotional aspect of it was just strangeness, just weird. It was just really weird. And people were not really operating by laws or procedures as I'd seen them operated by, and that they were kind of, I don't know, making it up as they went, which is frankly also really terrifying and unnerving too. Cause it's what, it's just whatever people want to do today. Is that what goes on in Waller County? I don't know.
It speaks so much about the at the very surface level, the lack of training for so many of these law enforcement officers in various capacities, from the bailiff onward, that they taking them at face value, they at least did not know how to say that you were being detained. They refused to kind of acknowledge what a detention was, because you clearly were being detained. You were not allowed to leave the building. That's a detention. To my, I'm not a lawyer, but that's my general understanding of what being detained is. And it also, it speaks to the level of impunity with which so much of law enforcement operates, especially in these in these sort of situations where they do not believe there's going to be any public accountability. Fortunately, it sounds like it sounds like you were very fortunate in many ways to have people who knew where you were, who were expecting you, and who could kind of force the hand of of an otherwise very sketchy set of law enforcement actors there. That's a pretty harrowing, both personal backstory as well as deeper history to what's going on in Waller County. And as we've mentioned, Waller County is the place where Sandra Bland was detained. I'm not sure if it was arrested or detained, but either way, she died in the jail under mysterious circumstances. So when we understand Waller County, obviously not trying to paint all Waller County residents, but understanding like the police system in Waller County to be of that kind of nature, the notorious area where Sandra Bland died in police custody. Understanding that sort of backstory, both the personal backstory and the history, we can now kind of talk about the moment of the lawsuit that's currently being filed by 5 students from Prairie View A&M against Waller County for essentially to establish their voting rights. So maybe you can bring us up to speed on what the situation with that is and what it is they're suing over once again.
The entire city and the campus within it have no early voting days during the entire first week. So no locations and no days. And those two things, obviously, like you can't have locations without days and vice versa. So they have no early voting within the city during the first week of early voting. And whereas other communities within Waller County have on average 4.6 days of early voting locations, various numbers of locations within the community. Meanwhile, the city only gets 3 days during the second week at Prairie View's campus, although I think there might be 1 or 2 other days at a community center on the first and second. So it's like only 3 days for the campus and maybe 5 days at most in the second week for the city as a whole. There might be 1 more day in the second week for the city that I've forgotten to account for, but I believe it's only 5. And so that's what the suit hinges on. So the suit hinges on, and the students are 5 students are plaintiffs to the lawsuit. The legal team bringing it is the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, and it's saying that this is manifestly unfair. A community of over 9,000 people has no early voting in the first week when other, frankly, smaller communities have as many as 4 and 5 days. Oh, pardon me. And so I believe the lawsuit was filed on Monday, and that's where we stand right now. I don't know that there's been significant movement on the lawsuit as of this interview. I do know that earlier today being the 24th, earlier today on Wednesday the 24th, there was a county commissioners meeting where this lawsuit was at subject, but most of the meeting was held in what the county commissioners court refers to as executive session, which is not open to the public and behind closed doors. I don't know that most of it is. I mean, maybe after I left, they had a lot of it in public, but that's not what I've heard. I haven't heard any report of that. And right now, I don't have any information about what the outcome of that meeting, if any significant outcome at all, vis-a-vis the lawsuit. So it looks like it's going to wind its way through the court. But I think that the county was. I mean, the rumors around the county courthouse were that the commissioners were trying to figure out a settlement offer to put before the students. But I'm not really sure what that would look like. Again, just rumor and innuendo and hearsay around the courthouse was that, well, perhaps they'll try to give more hours or more locations during the 3 days that they had scheduled. But I don't know how that'll be received by the 5 students necessarily, in sort of like precise terms how each of the 5 of them will react, but like in general, in terms of student sentiment, I don't imagine that'll be received very well. But it remains to be seen, and I'm not even really fully apprised of the outcome of that meeting today. So
Yeah, no, even the idea of compromising on voter rights, or this idea that somehow a county that apparently, as we've heard, has a rather large budget for its its law enforcement, for its police and sheriff's deputies, that so many could come to arrest you that something were just not doing anything else. A county that has that much sort of funding for law enforcement would have so little that it would have to ration its polling places in one of the most populous areas of the county, where Prairie View A&M is. In Prairie View, it doesn't follow any sort of logic, but then again, of course, we don't expect this kind of thing to follow logic. This is very much, as we've been talking about, this is a voter suppression effort. So has the situation regarding the two addresses been resolved in any meaningful way, or is that still pending as well?
Oh, that's a good question, and I maybe I should have touched on that earlier. But yeah, so after they released me, there was the DA and the county judge couldn't help themselves from commenting all over social media about it, and like a flurry of activity seemed to happen. A bunch of people were called, I guess. By various groups, either university student groups or others. I know calls were placed to the Justice Department and the Secretary of State. So long story short, the Secretary of State, I believe Rolando Pablos, his office gets in touch with the county. They get in touch with our campaign, as well as the university and some other leaders. I think maybe the city council was on that call, but I'm not sure. And city council members played and have played a really active role in the fight against voter suppression recently. That is, the city council members of Prairie View, the city itself, have played a really active role in trying to fight back against voter suppression too. I think they might have been on that call, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm sorry. In any event, so the Secretary of State pretty much makes Waller County say, okay, we're not going to require that any student registered at the improper address will have to fill out a new form. We're not going to require that they fill out a new form if they are registered at this address that finds itself outside of the voting precinct of the campus. And we will accept as valid the registrations that our county government basically, authorize the students to complete and fill out per their instructions and put those addresses. So we'll accept them as, in that precinct, and won't turn them away or make them fill out a new form at the election day poll.
Yeah. So
so in other words, there has been resolution on that one. That one's been completely kind of wiped out. The problem is, the problem with saying, that problem's been solved is that there's actually this other underlying problem, another bureaucratic obstacle that was introduced by that scheme. So when they changed all the addresses, I mentioned earlier, they changed all the addresses from these two placeholder addresses to specific addresses. Well, when they did that, they designated, a number in the street. We'll say 204 Ann Preston Street. Now, 204 Ann Preston Street is an on-campus dormitory, okay? But multiple addresses like it were put in either Waller 77484 as the city and zip code, or Hempstead 77445, as opposed to Prairie View, Texas 77446. In other words, in the dissemination of the new addresses that displaced the old placeholders, they also attempted a sort of bureaucratic erasure of the entire city of Prairie View. And this problem is actually intimately connected to the lack of a proper rural addressing system brought to the city that other parts of the county evidently, or at least as I've heard it told, have received. And so kids at the university, they don't even get their mail at a proper mailing address. And that has also been a tool in the toolbox of voter suppression, so that when they sent in the registrations, they wouldn't get their cards back or their other credentials in time. And that and the whole thing with the not giving them a proper zip code and a proper city aids in not having this proper addressing system that allows the post office to not deliver mail directly to almost any of the students at this campus, which, in conjunction with the voter ID law and this new address controversy that the county virtually manufactured of its own incompetence or malice, it's unclear which, when taking all those factors together, it presents like these multiple interlocking barriers to access to the franchise. And it's really, I mean, it's like I said earlier in this conversation, it's almost hard for me to like touch on all the different ways that the county and or like other parts of the government are trying to make sure these students don't vote. It's wild.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's one of the worst examples I've seen of just sort of blatant, as we've talked about, was the sort of strategic incompetence that in reality is entirely intentional and by design, a bureaucracy that at every attempt to fight it sort of multiplies like the Hydra, not to get too philosophical there. And for each sort of win, I feel like we see this sort of new sort of scheming to keep people from voting. How would you say this? How would you say this compares to so much of the other voter suppression that we've seen across the country? Because I feel like this is a really truly exemplary case study for how voter suppression plays out in so many other parts of the country. We've seen it most notoriously this election in Georgia, where Brian Kemp, right, of course, as supervising the legitimacy of the election that he is involved in, and has purged, I believe, well over 500,000 people, if I recall correctly, from the voter roll. So how would you say this stacks up nationally to what else you're seeing?
Well, I think that you're right in the sense that it's like a case study, because this one has a lot of endurance to it in terms of like the enduring nature of the attempts at like systemic disenfranchisement and other forms of discrimination and civil rights violations. So that's one aspect of it, is that it's been going on for a very long time. It's very sustained. I think that strategic incompetence and the introduction of like very, very late in the game rule changes, which is also something like Kemp was engaged in when I think his method was to like declare signatures difficult to decipher or something like that. Like he was nitpicking with like the handwritten forms. So like introducing late breaking rules is a strategy that's employed a lot. Strategic incompetence is a great strategy because in the strategies employed, it gives you plausible deniability and political cover, which is really important for for a lot of these people to keep doing what they do. I think that some people will look at this, I mean, they're like, and sort of look at the magnitudinal question of like, well, I mean, at the end of the day, it's only X number of students and like a chunk of them are registered in other counties, or people could make mitigating arguments. But something really interesting to think about is that like when I was looking back over some press of previous attempts at voter suppression and trying to like learn more, one thing that struck me was there was a sort of a digest in the 90s about some of this stuff that referenced back to the case in 79. And the one in the 90s, I couldn't tell if it was talking about 1979 or the time of its writing in 92 or 93, but it said that the county was slightly majority black, ever so slightly majority black. But earlier in our conversation, it seemed like you had current census data that said that the county was now like 60-something or like 59% white. So something people need to take account of with the sustained nature of this effort is that I think it's actually sort of like causing black people to like flee the county. Like it sounds like there's actually a substantial percentage less black people in Waller County than there was several decades ago. It sounds like people have been worn down, and through attrition and through constant hostility and adversity, it sounds like a lot of people may have just like, not decided to stay in Prairie View after school or leave Waller County and go to Harris County, or, that's really striking that it's, 59% white now. Because I didn't actually know that it was majority black several decades ago until I was reading those press clippings. So really that was the striking part. I had always thought that it had always been like, heavily white with like this concentrated pocket of black people at the Prairie View city and campus. But like, according to these prior press clippings, like there was a more substantial rural black population, maybe more spread out throughout Waller County.
And it's also
during the campaign. I definitely. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's also possible. I just want to interject very quickly and say that I looked up those the census data last minute, and I don't know whether the Prairie View students are counted in that or not. So that could be affecting the census data for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Basically, I think that people could raise the specter of like mitigating factors in terms of the scope and scale. It's not as many people as Georgia, but like there's something like really sinister about like the sustained effort to grind down an entire population of people, entire community of people, entire city, and maybe several other cities and communities or communities within cities across the county over a long time that can have really far-reaching effects. And they do employ a lot of the same tactics or strategies, if you will.
So then, what are the tools with which we can most effectively push back against this in your kind of assessment? How do we then, having seen this voter suppression play out largely across the country over successive decades since even the first pushes for civil rights, having seen this kind of constant erosion of voter rights that seems to continually haunt us, how then do we push back effectively against this system to a more kind of just and real sort of people's democracy that ensures that these aren't going to be eroded again by these same kind of forces within the next couple decades?
That's a incredibly difficult question. I guess my first general answer would be like we should look to communities and people who are kind of on the front lines of these struggles or face their worst repercussions or their worst consequences, and look to their leadership and think about the strategies they want to employ. A lot of the students and community members favor direct action, like protests and marches. Also, like really good in terms of obviously getting together just strong legal defense to at least try to hamstring or mitigate each attempt at suppression as it occurs. And organizing on the basis of issues during and between elections to create really strong coalitions, community movements, politically activated people who connect politics and or voting or just political consciousness in general to their material interests day in and day out, so that the entire community just rises up and like resists and fights back every time this happens. It definitely has to do with like organizing around issues that make vote that supercharge voting as an issue unto itself.
Yeah,
like if someone's taking away your right to vote, then they're taking away your right to have your voice heard on issues such as the education of your children, or the healthcare coverage that you might be able to get in this country, or just trying to like really organize a base around being politically conscious and active on issues, and like viewing voting as just one tool in a toolbox of like tactics to get justice, and then therefore defending the franchise really vigorously whenever it's attacked. And then also the strength of that is like if your franchise rights are being attacked, or if you find yourself under a hyper repressive state, then you like have other avenues or other tools to try to build power. If like the franchise is being systematically denied to you, to try to get it back and get your other demands met, as the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much there to really think about. We have been joined for this episode by Jacob Aronowitz. He's the Eastern Regional Field Director of the Mike Siegel campaign. He was recently arrested in Waller County for attempting to deliver a letter to the county asking that they demand resolution to the county's plan to require students to essentially fill out an additional form during the voter registration process. So we've been talking variously about the voter suppression in Waller County, as well as kind of how that plays out nationally, and strategies for fighting back against that and ensuring not just the voting rights, but in fact the real democratic participation of all people. So yeah, thank you, Jacob, very much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me and Mike Siegel campaign on the show, and I hope that the listeners find it somewhat valuable or informative.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've been listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. People's Republic originates out of KOOP Radio, Co-op Radio in Austin, Texas, and is also broadcast on WHIV in New Orleans. We are also available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever podcasts are podded. So thank you very much for listening. I want to give a brief update on this story. We recorded this earlier in the week in the studio, and since then, news has broken that the voting rights of Prairie View A&M students have been expanded due to the kind of pressure that's been put on the county. So this is a couple paragraphs from the Texas Tribune, which reported on this October 25th. And yeah, so they say, quote, 2 days after students at Prairie View A&M University sued Waller County over allegations that the county is suppressing the voting rights of Black residents, the rural county said it is expanding early voting opportunities for students at the historically Black university. The county will now open a Sunday polling place at Prairie View City Hall and expand voting hours at the university's campus center on Monday through Wednesday of next week to 7 a.m. from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. instead of the original 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. According to the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. Students can continue to early vote at the Waller County Community Center in Prairie View on Thursday and Friday of next week. So yeah, this is the kind of gain that comes through struggle. I want to congratulate Jacob and all the people at the Mike Siegel campaign who have been working on this, as well as the NAACP, the students who were part of this lawsuit, and all of the rest of Prairie View students on this victory. I know this is not this does not solve the problem at all. There are so many problems, not only with the electoral system, but also with generally the political process within the U.S. And it's an ongoing battle. It's an ongoing, struggle, but a gain is a gain, a win is a win, and hopefully we'll continue to see this sort of pushback against the voter suppression that we so desperately need. This power comes, of course, from people's movements. The more the people are connected to grassroots struggle, the more victories we win. So yeah, that's kind of the update on what happened with that story. It will continue to evolve, and hopefully we'll have somebody on soon to update us, at some point in the near future. So yeah, thanks for listening. That's all we have for this week. You've been listening to People's Republic with Brian Griffith. You can find our show on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher by typing in People's Republic. Or you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. Thank you for listening as we report on the global struggle for social and economic justice. We are out of here.